This is the action-packed fantasy story of how a teen orphan fights to become a king so he can save the world. No need to like or subscribe. Just enjoy the show. Badr sits in a bar and is confronted by two guards with piles of gold for his service in a recent war. However, Badr says he isn't worthy, and spends it on everyone's drinks, despite his clear sacrifice. He then pursues his job as a fisherman but finds his son, Sinbad, hidden on the boat. A storm suddenly appears and Badr struggles to keep the boat afloat, but Sinbad miraculously guides them out. This causes Badr to praise him as someone with the power to save the world. 2 years then pass, and Badr is celebrating a large fish catch before some angry citizens approach him. They accuse him of opposing the current war, which is explained to have led to the decline of the once great country of Parthivia as it attempted to conquer the nearby Rem Empire, leading to a bloody war. Badr laughs and expresses disinterest in the current war. He's much more concerned with catching fish and raising his son right. This enrages the group as they attack Badr, making him unconscious until Sinbad wakes him up. But despite his wounds, Badr is much more concerned that his lunch has been damaged before Sinbad cries how he should have defended himself. The two soon return home for dinner and Badr asks Sinbad to get some water as his wife explains how they are now poor and ostracized due to their opposition to the war. Suddenly, Sinbad appears and frantically asks Badr to follow him. They find a man unconscious and bring him inside their house to awaken. The man weeps with gratitude for their help and introduces himself as a merchant named Darius, whose ship had sunk. Sinbad then asks why Darius has yellow hair, so he explains that the world is full of different people and cultures waiting to be explored. This amazes Sinbad and Badr tells Darius to stay with them until he has recovered. Darius accepts and becomes almost a new member of the family as he shares all kinds of stories with Sinbad. Eventually, Darius decides to leave, but guards soon appear at the home in search of a spy. They are shocked to see Darius before he defeats them. He then grabs Sinbad as a hostage to escape before Badr arrives and begs him to release Sinbad. Badr further explains that as a spy, Darius has information and will be spared if he surrenders. This enrages Darius as he brings his blade closer to Sinbad, which forces Badr to lunge at and stab Darius, injuring himself in the process. He grabs Sinbad and shows anger for the first time, explaining that anyone who touches his family will suffer. Badr is tortured for harboring a spy before being sent to the battlefield. The townspeople mock Badr as he is marched out of the town until he removes his cloak and demonstrates the effects of war to the surrounding people as Sinbad watches with his mother. In a final few words to Sinbad, Badr says to become a real man and take care of his mom, to which Sinbad nods. After a few months, Sinbad receives Badr's sword and some money in a casket, signifying the death of his father. Almost a decade passes and Sinbad is finally 14, ready to begin his journey. With the war having only grown over the past decade, a magical tower appeared between the countries of Parthivia and Rem. Both sides sent thousands of soldiers to claim it, but none survived the unknown horrors within. Meanwhile, a small group enters a town to sell some goods when they are attacked by bandits. However, a teenage Sinbad appears and defeats the bandits with ease. The group explains that they had no protection since most men are fighting in the war. In response, Sinbad offers to protect them, but they kindly refuse and offer Sinbad some fruit as thanks for his help. However, one of the barrels contains a man named Yunan who decides to follow Sinbad home. Back in his village, Sinbad gives some fruit to the townspeople and even does all kinds of chores before finally bringing Yunan home. The next day, Sinbad leaves for work while his mother speaks with Yunan. She tells him that she is sad to be a burden to Sinbad due to her being sick and then asks him to look after Sinbad, to which he accepts. Suddenly, a woman rushes in and tells them that Sinbad is in danger. Outside, Sinbad is battered on the ground with several soldiers around him. They accuse him of dodging the war draft and tell him that if he doesn't comply, his mother will be punished alongside him. The commander, known as Dragul, leaves after telling Sinbad about the dungeon and the power within that can help Parthivia win the war. This shakes Sinbad as he tells Yunan he will most likely die no matter what he does and that the country has gone to hell. Yunan responds with an eerie calmness and tells Sinbad to conquer the dungeon for the power to change the world. Sinbad is skeptical but ultimately accepts. Meanwhile, Dragul complains that he is being sent to the dungeon to die so that the citizens will continue supporting the war. In response, a woman known as Serendine appears and tells Dragul to be careful of his words. The two appear close, with her joking about their time together as children and him swearing to capture the dungeon for her honor. When the time comes to enter the dungeon, Dragul is notified that Sinbad hasn't arrived before Sinbad appears behind him and enters the dungeon ahead of the soldiers. Within, Sinbad is faced with breathtaking scenery, at least until deafening screams fill the dungeon. The Pardavion soldiers get ripped apart within seconds by several dragons until Sinbad saves Dragul. The two reluctantly team up for survival and must open a large door to proceed through the dungeon. However, Dragul learns that the door will not open until the largest dragon has been defeated. As a result, Sinbad uses Dragul's shield and a set of geysers to propel himself above the dragon before plunging his sword into its head, defeating the beast and revealing two stones that open the doors to continue. As the two progress, Dragul begins developing respect for Sinbad until they eventually reach the end of the dungeon. The two are surrounded by a variety of trinkets made of stone until Sinbad touches a special lamp that changes color and transforms all of the stone trinkets into silver and gold before a massive djinn appears with a flash of lightning. The djinn is named Baal and asks who wishes for its power, to which both Sinbad and Dragul respond. The two then battle despite their recent friendship, and although Dragul overpowers Sinbad in swordsmanship, the latter uses several punches to secure a narrow victory. Baal then imbues Sinbad's sword with a special mark and transports him and the treasure to a crater where the dungeon once stood. Sinbad is then confronted by several soldiers who request he forfeit the treasure before Yunnan arrives to awaken his new power, striking down the soldiers with fierce lightning. Yunnan then sends Sinbad flying back to his hometown where he experiences the final moments of his mother. This fills him with sorrow, but also the strength to truly begin his journey towards kingship. Later, Sinbad finally escapes Partivia on a small ship by using Princess Serendine as a hostage before making his escape. Having completed the first dungeon, numerous others begin appearing around the world as Sinbad makes his way to a northern country known as Imchuk. Here he encounters two siblings struggling to defeat a beast, which results in Sinbad using Baal to save them. Meanwhile, Dragul is sent with assassins known as Jafar, Vidal, and Mahid to hunt down Sinbad as he attempts to speak with those in Imchuk. Regardless, Sinbad speaks with the siblings, who introduce themselves as Papirica and Hina. Sinbad insists on speaking with the leader of Imchuk, who is coincidentally their father. The two eventually speak and he mentions that a strange structure has appeared. Sinbad explains that it is a dungeon and to not approach it. The leader is skeptical but comes to respect Sinbad once he shows his sword in which Baal sleeps. Eventually, Sinbad is resting when he is attacked by Jafar. Despite this, he manages to kick Jafar in his sleep before awakening and using Baal to capture him. Sinbad then attempts to speak with Jafar, but he soon escapes. Sinbad soon explains to Hina that he is a wanted man but is fighting for what he believes in. This impresses Hina and leads him to pursue the nearby dungeon to become like Sinbad. After learning this, Sinbad follows closely behind as Yunnan appears to watch from afar. The dungeon is soon revealed to be a beautiful cave full of butterflies. However, Hina is soon swarmed by the butterflies as they attempt to devour him, forcing him to flee into the icy water. Meanwhile, Dragul and the assassins make their way through the dungeon with ease until they face Hina. Hina attempts to fight them but is nearly defeated when Sinbad comes to save him before the two escape towards the dungeon treasury. The assassins are each then given a purple substance by their priestess, healing their wounds before they follow. Once inside, they encounter a djinn known as Balfour, who swiftly disposes of the priestess before changing form and asking who wishes to be king. In response, everyone decides to compete for the power. As a test, Balfour summons a small cat, and whoever catches it will gain his power. At first, everyone recklessly fights each other for the cat to no avail until Sinbad persuades them to team up. The others accept as they surround the cat and lunge at it together before it narrowly escapes by jumping right into Sinbad's grasp. This angers the others, but Sinbad explains his ambition to use his power for a country that will save the world, even offering those present to join him. This inspires everyone, and even the assassins consider his proposal. However, this peace is short-lived as a purple substance begins spilling out of their bodies and they merge together, forming a giant demon. But rather than easily slay the demon with Baal, Sinbad decides to save the assassins by destroying the demon's core. However, it manages to separate Baal from Sinbad, requiring him and Dragul to distract it while Hina gathers his strength to pierce its heart. Sinbad swiftly retrieves Baal as the assassins regain their consciousness. However, Jafar begins transforming back into the demon, which causes Sinbad to thrust his arm into the corruption in an attempt to save Jafar. With the help of Bale's lightning, Sinbad successfully saves him, and the group shares a moment of triumph as Sinbad acquires the power of Baleful. Outside, the Imchuk tribe celebrates their return as Dragol informs Sinbad that he will return to Partivia but expresses remorse that he could not serve Sinbad. As he departs, the mark of a jinn appears on his earring, signifying that he has gained a fraction of Bale's power through a shared connection with Sinbad known as a household vessel. Back in the village, Hina is given the name Hinahoho to signify he has become a warrior through clearing the dungeon. As the villagers celebrate this, Hinahoho informs his father of his wish to follow Sinbad, which is approved. Before they leave, Hinahoho meets with the king of Imchuk and asks to marry his daughter Rurumu. The king is angered by this and asks what Hinahoho can provide her, to which he responds that he will be a major part of a new country created by Sinbad. This helps to create a trade agreement between Sinbad and Imchuk as the two leave for the Rem Empire in pursuit of trade. On the way there, Sinbad and Jafar experience the torture of education as Rurumu teaches them basic subjects for the first time in their lives. But after many days, they eventually reach Rem and begin selling their products with great success. However, they are soon informed that they need a permit to sell in Rem before a mysterious man approaches Sinbad to buy all of the products. With no other choice, Sinbad agrees and gains a lot of money, but soon learns that the man has begun reselling all of the products for 10 times the price. The group is disappointed, but Sinbad persuades them to retrieve more goods while he promises to gain a permit to sell in Rem once the group leaves. Sinbad encounters the mysterious man from before and decides to speak with him over dinner. The man introduces himself as the merchant, Haroun. Haroun offers to teach Sinbad about trade in exchange for knowledge about how Sinbad managed to secure trade from Imchuk, which has denied all other merchants. After accepting the offer, Sinbad uses Baleful to freeze Haroun's drink and explains that he is a dungeon capturer. Haroun is intrigued, and as he leaves, he offers Sinbad a trade permit for Rem if he can acquire 1,000 gold within a month. With a newfound purpose, Sinbad gets an idea before 1 month finally passes. When Haroun visits Sinbad, a crowd watches as he captivates them with stories from the dungeon. The crowd goes wild with excitement as they see the power Sinbad wields, and they throw several coins towards him as payment. Upon seeing Haroun, Sinbad approaches him but apologizes upon realizing he does not have the agreed 1,000 gold. However, Haroun smiles as his guard provides Sinbad with a large bag filled with gold. Upon accepting the massive amount, Sinbad inquires as to Haroun's true identity before he is reintroduced as Rashid, the 22nd king of the port country, Balbad. As Sinbad's crew returns to Rem with new goods, Jafar continues his resistance to Rurumu's education. She acknowledges that education may be unimportant for an assassin like Jafar, but that everyone must improve to help Sinbad in his journey as a merchant. But as she speaks, she cries out in pain as she informs Jafar that she is pregnant. Later on, she reveals her new son, Kikiriku, to Jafar, and the two grow attached quickly. Meanwhile, Sinbad is ecstatic to hold his permit for trade in Rem as Rashid suggests that he tells stories for a much larger audience in a theater for more money and to advertise his store. Sinbad accepts and stuns the crowds with his creative use of ball and tales of the dungeon. His stories are so engaging that even the largest theaters can't fit all willing to see him. Thus, he decides to move his stories to the Colosseum. When Jafar and the others arrive, they are escorted to the Colosseum to watch as Sinbad tells the tale of Valifor's dungeon. During this, Kikiriku decides to wander off. But when Jafar catches up to him, he is found in the grasp of a Colosseum monster. To save Kikiriku, Jafar utilizes the power of Baal through his connection with Sinbad and defeats the monster before falling unconscious. Upon awakening, Sinbad informs Jafar that Kikiriku is fine before learning about Jafar's household vessel, even assuming that Jafar is the first to awaken such a power. The group soon finds that Sinbad now has a massive headquarters for their business and further demonstrates his newfound wealth by wearing all kinds of jewelry. King Rashid is also with Sinbad but informs him that he will be returning to Balbad and looks forward to doing business in the future. As a final piece of advice, he advises Sinbad to write a book of his adventures, which Sinbad does, named The Adventures of Sinbad, same as this anime. With his great success, Sinbad decides to pursue trade with another country, known as the Kingdom of Sassan. Jafar explains that the country is known for its minerals and that it has recently begun trade with Rem, making it a perfect opportunity for an early trade agreement. However, he is concerned about leaving the company in the hands of Vidal and Mahad until Sinbad insists that he trusts them. Upon entering Sasson, the people avoid Sinbad and he is rejected a trade agreement as an outsider. But this does not stop Sinbad, and he learns that he must speak with the Sasson royal knights and their king, Darius Leoxus, to develop a further relationship. Upon seeing them, Sinbad notices that the king bears the mark of a jinn on his lance and calls out but is quickly stopped by the guards. Eventually, Sinbad decides to rest at an inn for the night and encounters the son of the king, known as Mistras. Mistras expresses excitement to hear about the outside world from Sinbad and is gifted his book as Sinbad tells his story. Upon returning home, Mistras is confronted by his father who slaps him for speaking with an outsider. This angers Mistras, so he returns to Sinbad and begs to join him. Upon hearing this, Sinbad accepts, and Mistras goes to challenge his father in battle for the right to leave Sasson. Before Sinbad goes to witness the fight, he encounters Yunnan, who comments that 2 years have passed since their last meeting and that several nations now have dungeon capturers aside from Sinbad, before once again disappearing. Sinbad then proceeds to watch Mistras fight his father, but to no avail, once Darius activates his djinn in the form of an impenetrable wall which reflects Mistras's attacks and knocks him to the ground. Darius readies a finishing strike against Mistras before Sinbad interferes and challenges Darius to a battle. The knights attempt to capture Sinbad, but upon demonstrating Baal's power, Darius has no choice but to accept. The two trade blows before Sinbad uses Baal's lightning against Darius's barrier. Upon realizing it's an even fight, Sinbad laughs that he even isn't using his full power before his body pulsates and becomes covered in scales and blue light. With this exponential growth in power, Sinbad brings down a massive beam of lightning on Darius before using his new form to capture him and bring him outside of Sasson before demonstrating his true power with another lightning strike which tears a hole straight through several faraway mountains. This surprises Darius as Sinbad explains that he could destroy Sasson at any time he wished. In addition, Sinbad explains that he wishes to form an alliance with Sasson for both trade and to prevent war from spreading across the land. Eventually, Darius and Sinbad return to the knights and explain that they have now become allies. After establishing this alliance, Darius sends Mistras to follow Sinbad and expresses that he too once desired to leave Sasson when he was younger but never told anyone until now. This causes Mistras to cry as he thanks Darius for everything and sets out with Sinbad. The group then proceeds towards another destination known as Artemira, which is home to primarily women. However, the group must traverse a large canyon for several exhausting days before reaching it. Once in Artemira, the group realizes that they stink from their exhausting journey and decides to bathe before speaking with the queen about their trade agreement. Upon reaching the throne room, Sinbad speaks with the queen, who expresses disinterest in pursuing trade with a group of only men. Sinbad pleads with her, but she then decides to arrest the entire group. Upon doing so, both learn that they each have a jinn. This causes her to take away Sinbad's jinns, even going as far as stripping the rest of the group of their belongings before knocking them into the canyon outside. However, Hinahoho is spared this as the female guards decide to examine his large body. Upon reaching the bottom of the canyon, Sinbad and the others are surprised to be alive after a pool of water broke their fall. However, their happiness is short-lived upon realizing they have no way out of the canyon and are starving. But with no energy, the group eventually falls asleep. However, Sinbad soon awakens at the sound of hissing and learns that they are surrounded by hundreds of snakes. Upon escaping, they begin to lose hope until Jafar grabs a snake and rips it in half, explaining that they can use it as food to regain their strength. With no other choice, Sinbad and Mistras excitedly accept. As the days progress, the group builds a small house for themselves and continues eating snakes to survive. They even begin enjoying this new lifestyle. That is until Mistras snaps and begins shouting about how the group is still trapped in the canyon. However, Sinbad and Jafar explain that living as hermits is incredibly fulfilling for them and that they no longer desire to leave the canyon. This angers Mistras as he continues exploring for ways to escape the canyon. Along the way, he finds a massive cut of meat and brings it to Sinbad and Jafar. Mistras explains that the meat must have come from somewhere that could help them escape. However, Sinbad and Jafar are only concerned with enjoying the meat, which only angers Mistras more. However, upon further investigation, the group learns that precious gems from the canyon are growing inside of the meat. This leads them to search for more meat, which they eventually see carried out of the canyon by large birds from Artemira. Outside the canyon, a group of men carry baskets full of precious gems that have been picked from the meat from the canyon. However, the guard expresses annoyance at the lack of gems, to which the men explain the meat has been going missing. Thus, the guard decides to use much larger chunks of meat for a better harvest. Upon retrieving the gem-covered meat, the guard is shocked to find Sinbad, Jafar, and Mistras appear from within. The group then asks the other men for some clothes before Jafar explains that the meat was used to farm gems until they started eating it all, resulting in much larger pieces being dropped to prevent that which they used to escape. After this, Sinbad decides to pay the queen another visit. Before attempting to sleep, the queen admires Valifor's vessel but regrets that she cannot use its power. Soon, Sinbad appears in her room and retrieves his jinns before the two engage in battle. The queen demonstrates considerable power as she uses her jinn to transform and fight Sinbad evenly to the point where he must change from Baal to Valifor. With a new form, Sinbad takes his time baiting out several attacks from the queen while narrowly avoiding each one. Eventually, Sinbad even teleports around the queen. However, Jafar explains that Valifor can freeze anything including people and their senses to the point where even the queen can barely react. Thus, Sinbad secures his victory by completely freezing the queen using Valifor's power. The next day, Sinbad returns to speak with the queen in her palace, and she finally agrees to trade on account of the favorable trade agreement and to prevent making an enemy of Sinbad. However, she expresses curiosity as to Sinbad's true goal for visiting her kingdom. Sinbad explains his desire to create an alliance and become a king to prevent wars from occurring. This intrigues the queen and she accepts Sinbad's proposition. As the group leaves, one of the citizens returns Hinahoho to them, although he appears drained and covered in kiss marks. After a few jokes about this, the group encounters the diplomat who will accompany them as a representative of Artemira before finally returning to the company headquarters in Rem and celebrating their newfound power. Hope you enjoyed. Sadly, this anime only got one season and it came out 7 years ago, so you'll have to read the manga for the rest. Now let me know any way I can improve in the comments and expect another video next week.